Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon to everyone and welcome to our webinar today, where we are looking at wildlife-based economy. I think we will keep at meeting people as we go on. But for now, just want to welcome representatives of our distinguished member states, representatives maybe of, if any, from our community representatives, private sector, our ICPs, wherever you are, international cooperating partners that have joined us, the members of our civil society that might have joined us as well, academics, and any individuals who have joined us representing themselves. We are all welcome. And thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. My name is Rabson Giorgio. I'll be facilitating this session. I work for GIZ in Gaborone. The title of our webinar today is the role of the wildlife-based economy in conservation and sustainable development. But before we proceed, allow me just to look at some of our housekeeping rules. Firstly, please register your name in the chat. If you can just put in your full name, organization, and country. And for as long as is possible, if you can please keep your mics on mute. Unless and until you are talking. You also are welcome to post questions on the chat box, questions and comments on the chat box. Or if you want to share the questions or comments, you please raise your hand. I've got colleagues who will be helping me to identify any of us who have their hands raised. We have, to my understanding, been allocated 1.5 hours for this session. So unfortunately, part of my role is the unpleasant task of having to limit some of the discussions when time is not permitting. You will have to forgive me in advance if I find myself having to do that. But yeah, we will try and, as much as possible, stick to that time frame. Right, Raleigh, I think we can go on to the next slide. Just so I'm sure what follows on our program. Rolly, can you hear me?
Yes, I moved the slide. It's the objectives of the webinar. That is not what it's been.
Oh yes. Okay. Thank you very much. For some reason, I thought it was something else. Colleagues, just as a reminder that we agreed and decided for this TFCA network that we will run a series of these webinars as a way of sharing information, discussions, and debates on issues that impact largely on our TFCAs, but broadly also impact on conservation of our natural resources in general. So that is always been our overall objective for this webinar series, to share information, ideas, discussions on any issues that impact on the implementation and management of our TFCAs. But for today, with our focus on wildlife-based economy, our objective is to share information, ideas, and experiences on the wildlife-based economy in preparation for the start of the implementation of the recently approved SADC Wildlife-Based Economy Strategy Framework, which I'm sure a good number of us have seen. If not, I think you are free to talk to our SADC colleagues to get you a link to access the framework. But this is a framework which was approved earlier this year by our SADC system, and we are now preparing for the start of the implementation of that strategy framework. Before we proceed, allow me to request my co-facilitators to talk to us about the Mentimeter that she wants us to just quickly go through. Leanne Kent will share with us the Mentimeter. Leanne, over to you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to share a link in the chat for you to join the Mentimeter while I share my screen, because this one will disappear momentarily. I hope you can all see my screen.
We can, thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll give it a couple of seconds for you to join the Mentimeter. As I've mentioned, I've shared the link in the chat as well, which might give you quicker access, and then we'll get started. Let me move to the first question while people are joining. So, first question, icebreaker, let's get to know everyone. How much do you know about the wildlife economy? So it's ranging from not much, but excited to learn. I sort of know, it needs some refreshing. I know a lot, but could know more. And then there's, of course, the know-it-alls. Let's see if there's anybody who knows it all. I believe there are quite a few in this room who do perhaps know it all, but whether they'll share that or not, I'm not sure. So most kind of know, need some refreshing, a few excited to learn, and then a few who could learn a bit more. So this is great to hear. Everyone seems really eager about the wildlife, learning about the wildlife economy. So just to save time, I'll move over to the next question. And how do you participate in the wildlife economy? And this is not work related, because I believe that most of you who have joined this webinar are probably working in some form or other in the wildlife economy. So a couple of words of how you participate, whether it's through products or services in the wildlife economy, just to get an idea on how the audience is gauging in the wildlife economy. I don't see anyone. Marketing park, okay. Capacity building, a lot of this sounds work related, but how do you as an individual contribute to the wildlife economy? Maybe I should have used contribute instead of participate. A lot of work related stuff. Anyone in their personal capacities? Eating game meat, there we go. Tourism, there we go. Using products, it'll be interesting to know what products you are using within the wildlife industry. Ecotourism, more tourism coming up. So a lot of product-based and tourism coming through. So this could give our speakers an idea of where we can touch on within the wildlife economy. So a lot of moving around going on here, struggling to keep up. Tourism's taking the big one. Tourism's taking the most. Okay, beauty products, good to hear. Any coffee coming through? I don't think so. Anyone drinking Ethiopian coffee, they contribute to the wildlife economy. But anyway, let me move on. So from here, I'm going to move over to some stats. Let's see if anybody knows any stats from the wildlife economy. So what percentage of flora in the Southern African region is being used as traditional medicine? See if any votes are coming in. Some optimism. People are quite optimistic. Optimistic at 25%, and some are a little less optimistic at 10%. 13.5, we've got 2. 15, we've got 1. And let's reveal the answer. The answer is in fact 13.5%. Southern Africa is globally recognized for its biodiversity, as I'm sure most of us know. And it's estimated that just under 3,000 wild plant species, or that equates to 13.5 species of flora in the region, is being used for traditional medicine. So this is what is being documented. So it could, those who are on the optimistic side, it could be more, but it's not being documented. So this is why research is important. Let's go over to the next question. What % of African honey was produced by Tanzania? 5, 10, 15, or 20%? See. Also optimistic. A lot of optimism. Numbers are varying, but still staying optimistic. Coming down. Okay, let's reveal the answer. Oh, shucks, not move on. Sorry about that. The answer is, in fact, 15%. So a little more optimistic than the previous answer, but still not quite there. So 2 of the top honey producing countries in Africa are SADC member states. Tanzania, being the highest of those 2 members, produced approximately 30,000 metric tons, which is 15% of African honey in 2018. And Angola came in second at 23,000 metric tons, which is approximately 12% in terms of African honey produced. Let's go over to the next question and the final question. What was the approximate percentage of the wildlife-based economy contribution to the SADC GDP in 2019? 1.3, 4.6, 7.1, and 10.6%. Oh, optimistic, not so optimistic. Numbers are varying, Everyone's been quite optimistic. I have a feeling you think I'm going to catch you out on this one and make it the optimistic one, but let's see. Okay, let's reveal the answer. It is 4.6%. So once again, there is room for growth. So I appreciate that optimism. I think there certainly is room for growth there. The SADC contribution to the wildlife-based economy was estimated to be 31.5 billion in 2019, which is 4.6 of the total GDP for SADC. South Africa came out on top with 9.5 billion USD, followed by DRC with an estimated 7.7, and then Tanzania came in third with $3 billion US. So thanks everyone for participating. And just so you know that these come from the wildlife-based economy strategy framework, which I think has been shared in the chat, as well as our State of the Wildlife Economy report in Africa. So thanks to everyone for participating. I hope everyone's feeling energized and enjoy the rest of the webinar. Rapson, back over to you.
Thank you very much, Leanne. Some good start there. At least now we have a good idea of who produces, well, you didn't say the best, but the most honey in the region, and an idea of the contribution of wildlife-based economy to our GDP as SADC. But also, I think it's good that no one voted to be a know-it-all in this topic. So that promises us that we are not likely to have someone who is going to leave this webinar as a bored somebody. We will proceed now into our presentations. We have 4 presentations in total, and I would really kindly request that we presenters firstly try and be as brief as we possibly can. We will allow some questions, mostly for clarifications, and some quick questions after the first 2 presentations, and then allow more time for questions and comments at the end of the 4 presentations. So if we can just remember that, after the first 2 presentations, it will be more of questions of clarifications and some quick questions, and then more discussion after the 4th presentation. Let me then introduce our 3 presenters, starting with Melanie Wilkinson, who is a principal researcher with Sustento Development Services. I can tell you now they assisted in developing the strategy framework for us, and thank you very much, Melanie and team, for that. Melanie is going to be giving us a broad overview of the strategy framework. That will be followed by Dr. Sue Snyman from African Leadership University, who will be talking to us. I think she's basically telling us you can't manage what you don't measure. So whatever the presentation it is who is going to be talking towards getting us to understand what we should know and what we should measure. That will be followed by Dr. Francis Voorhees from the African Wildlife Economy Institute with Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And he will be talking to us about the opportunity for the SADC wildlife-based economy strategy framework to promote intra-SADC and intra-African trade in wildlife-based products. And then finally, we will be hearing from Dr. Tabang Tefo from Southern African Wildlife College as the head of Responsible Resource Management Department at the Wildlife College. And he will be talking to us about looking ahead, capacity building initiative to support the SADC wildlife-based economy strategy framework. As presenters, if you think there's anything I might have left out that's important for us to know about you, please do so quickly at the start. And then let me then allow Melanie to take us through the first presentation. Melanie, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I hope everyone can hear me. I've been asked to introduce the wildlife-based economy strategy framework. So I'm going to try and give you a very airport overview of the framework and very quickly introduction to it. Next slide, please. I think the underlying principles of the strategy is that, or the starting point for the strategy is that we all recognize we've got the most amazing biodiversity across the region, and that biodiversity is very important from a conservation point of view, from a tourism and value chain point of view, but also from a community point of view. And those particular resources are vital to the economies of many of the countries, if not all the countries in the region. We also have, obviously, challenges with high levels of poverty in the region. And noting that and the principles of the SADC agreement, which is to recognize human rights and to act within human rights principles, and also equity, balance, and mutual benefits. The SADC Secretariat and member states initiated the development of this, the wildlife-based economy framework. And this started, I think, right at the height of COVID. I think it was 2020. I seem to remember sitting in our individual homes developing the framework with the member states, the Secretariat and GIZ. The initiative was obviously supported by the GIZ. And the strategy went through a number of stakeholder reviews and was finally endorsed or accepted by the ministers, the joint in a joint meeting by the ministers of SADC in 2023, and the actual strategy itself was launched this year. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, the purpose of the strategy is to provide direction to growing and expanding the wildlife-based economy in the SADC region. But at the same time, and it's important to recognize this in the strategy, it's to grow the economy, the wildlife-based economy within the constraints of conservation and protecting our native biodiversity. So basically, it's to balance the conservation and sustainable use imperatives with increasing the trade and investment in the wildlife-based economy in the region. Next slide, please. If you've looked at the framework document, you'll see this is slightly different to the diagram in the document. We've just expanded it as the Secretariat, GIZ, and the member states are currently developing a costed action plan. But it has the same core components as are shown in the strategy. What is the wildlife-based economy? Basically, it's any business and economic activity within the region that makes use of indigenous or native terrestrial, freshwater, and marine species. It's documented in many countries, and it includes both animals and plant species. We all tend to either focus on one of our core areas. We often hear, I'll often use in all my examples the plant side because I'm very focused on that side of the wildlife-based economy. But tourism crosses both of these, both terrestrial and marine and freshwater, and it's animals and plants. So it's a very broad economy that we haven't over the years well documented. A number of countries have, but there are plenty of countries that still need to document and actually elevate the contribution of this economy to their GDP. Next, please. There are a number of value chains, and a value chain approach is taken by the particular framework. But just looking at the terrestrial species, some of the key value chains that are already existing in the region are the game farming, trophy hunting, trade in live species, which is often not documented, and we're not very good at highlighting that particular value chain. We also have a number of value chains that produce animal products. Looking at the plant side of it, we've got trade in actual plant species, but also then medicinal plants and bio-trade or prospecting, and that's where we talk about these products, the beautiful marula products and baobab oils that we have, and mafura butter, and all those ingredients that we use in the bioprospecting, biotrade value chain. And then in the marine sector and other freshwater sector, we have got things like diving. Fishing is a very large component of the wildlife-based economy. We've got aquaculture, and then also the bioprospecting and biotrade of plant species in those value chains. I think it's important to also just keep in mind that the key principles underpinning the value chains are that there's sustainable use. We protect the assets that are in the inputs into the value chains, that the process of use is legal, and trade is a legal trade, that we recognize fair and equitable sharing of benefits between communities, and also that we look at community-driven value chains now and into the future, recognizing and acknowledging traditional knowledge and inclusivity, and then also safeguarding existing value chains. And with that, to safeguard existing value chains, we do need to safeguard the assets that are inputs and conserve the assets, our biodiversity assets that are critical inputs into these value chains. Next, please. With that in mind, and I think Leanne gave you a number of the snapshot details of contribution to GDP, but the framework includes a baseline of 2019 of contribution of the different countries to the wildlife-based economy of the region. So in 2019, as indicated, it was estimated to be $31.3 billion US. Next, please. We have provided in the framework different scenarios, and obviously we want to look at a scenario where we get the highest output over time. So the lowest scenario, basically, in this diagram shows where we continue effectively as business as usual, which at the time of conducting the market sizing and value chain analysis, the wildlife-based economy was shrinking, and therefore it would continue on that path to 2030, which would then result in a $6 billion US value for the wildlife value chain, wildlife biodiversity economy. The weekly optimistic is the middle ground, where we would reach a $51 billion US by 2030. And we're looking at, the framework obviously puts in place the strategic objectives and actions for the positive growth outlook. And we should be striving for this positive growth outlook, which is an estimated $158 billion US by 2030. And with that, protecting and conserving the resources to maintain that growth over that the period. Next, please. So the vision of the strategy, and I'm just going to give you some of the key aspects of the vision, is that we're looking at a transformative economy, and that's transformative in the broadest sense of the term. We want to look at the wildlife-based economy contributing to employment and creating new and exciting and innovative and transformative jobs. We also want to obviously see equity in opportunities. That's for our communities, for our individual value chains within our countries, and then also contributes that we would like, we want to see in our vision that the wildlife-based economy contributes to a sustainable quality of life for our communities and for our countries. The goal, therefore, is that this strategy is globally recognized, and that it actually we become a region that's recognized for sustainably using our biodiversity and our natural resources to grow the region's economy. Next, please. We have 4 broad strategic objectives, and they have very different focuses. The first one being that the first strategic objective, which looks at the development of innovative, transformative value chains. It focuses largely on growing the economic value chain. So how do we bring in or expand existing value chains, maintain and safeguard the existing value chains, bring in new exciting value chains that we are already seeing emerging in the region, and then also looking at opportunities for value chains. So what do we have now, and how do we grow that? But also, what can we grow? What resources are available, are already existing to grow this economy? The second strategic objective looks at how do we make the value chains inclusive, but also community driven. So a focus on very much our communities getting involved in the value chains, driving the value chains. And that's not just as stewardships of the resources, stewards of the resources, but also participating along the entire value chain. So making products, selling products, running, oil processing plants. So that strategic objective focuses on livelihoods and bringing our communities into the wildlife-based economy. The third one looks at how we work together as member states and as a region and build our enabling environment to ensure that we have a sustainable wildlife-based economy. And then the final one, which was actually part of this process today, is to ensure that we as a region recognize the wildlife-based economy strategy framework, but also we operate within that framework. And then we actually together collectively speak in one voice for this framework and for the economy across the globe and across the regions and our continent. Next, please. So just very quickly, the costed action plan is busy being developed and an M&E framework. And I think Sue will speak to you about measurement and ensuring that we keep track, we get good baselines, but also keep track of our progress with the resources, but also with these value chains and other components. But some of the core aspects that countries and member states need to focus on now is ensuring that the policy and legal framework is in place in their countries, that the institution is in place, that we engage and bring in our stakeholders and resource stewards and communities into the process of implementing the framework. We ensure that whatever we do is within our national and regional conservation ambits and sustainable use. That we focus initially on regional value chains. We already have some wonderful regional value chains such as baobab, marula, our ranching, hunting. So there are some existing regional value chains that we can grow, but we can also then bring in some others. It's important that we right from the start put in place our monitoring, evaluation, learning, and adaptive management, that we share together, look for the resources, and then we continue as we are today with communication and awareness. Sorry, I did go a little bit over the 10 minutes. Apologies, Rapson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melanie. I think we should just move on straight to Sue. You can't manage what you don't measure. Sue, over to you.
Thanks, Rapson. Thanks, Melanie, for that great introduction to the framework. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm going to be talking about essentially these baselines and understanding them, and a little bit of the work that we've done at the African Leadership University School of Wildlife Conservation. So some of what I'm going to present will be familiar to those of you who've seen our presentations, but essentially we wanted to just put this as an overview to start. So next slide, please. So essentially, conservation has always been traditional conservation about protecting nature from people. So this protectionist exclusion, always having fences. Next slide, please. But what we need to do is have more of conservation needing to be about protecting fauna and flora for people and not from people. And so this is the alignment of conservation and development, and essentially is the wildlife economy. Next slide, please. So just to ensure that we're all on the same page as we continue this discussion here is to define the wildlife economy. It uses indigenous wildlife, plants and animals, marine, freshwater and terrestrial, as an economic asset to create value that aligns with conservation objectives and delivers sustainable growth and economic development. So that is essentially a summary definition of what Melanie presented, very much about being that it's plants and animals, everything, from whales, seaweed, to elephants, to mushrooms, and everything in between. But the critical things, again, as Melanie mentioned, are aligning this conservation and development. And so there has to be elements of both of these in the activities in the wildlife economy. Next slide, please. So what we at the university have looked at is mostly what we call the big 5 wildlife economy activities, which are ecotourism, hunting, wildlife ranching, carbon market, and forest products. And the reason we separated hunting out, even though it is a part of ecotourism, is just because in parts of Africa it's very large, and obviously because of the controversy around it, we really wanted to understand the value of it in terms of the wildlife economy. And then forest products is something that is becoming a lot bigger, and we do sometimes look at charcoal and firewood, though that doesn't necessarily often align with conservation objectives, but is an important part of this conservation sort of wildlife economy on the continent. Next slide, please. So we published this report that Leanne mentioned earlier in 2021 that looked at the state of the wildlife economy in Africa. We tried to look at those 5 activities across the continent, but data was very scarce and often outdated, not comparable. So we decided to focus rather on country case studies and try and really get a better understanding at a national level of what the wildlife economy is. What was the value of it? What are the revenues from it? What are the jobs that are created? What are the GDP contributions? So next slide, please. In terms of SADC, these are the case studies to date. So we have published one for Tanzania, Zambia, South Africa, and Zimbabwe will be published today. So very good timing for today. And thank you to everyone who contributed to those or who participated in the reviews. Currently under review are Angola, Namibia, Botswana, DRC, and Mozambique. If anyone is interested in reviewing one of those, please do let us know. The more reviews we can get from people who are working in these spaces on the ground, the better. We might have missed data, and we really want to make sure we are capturing these as baselines. And currently being drafted are Madagascar and Mauritius, and Malawi is being drafted, as well as Mozambique. Sorry, Eswatini. I was wondering, Mozambique is under review. Eswatini is being drafted. So again, if you are working in any of those areas, please reach out to myself or my colleagues. And we really welcome text box examples of good value chains, of good activities, of where there is good data, which is what we found. It's very seldom that it is at a national level. So we really are not measuring this value. And so how can we manage the wildlife economy properly if we don't have the measurement? And then in 2025, we will be doing Lesotho, Comoros, and Seychelles. So please, again, if anyone wants to be involved in either co-authoring or providing text boxes or reviewing, please do let us know. Next slide, please. So essentially those case studies will help to provide this baseline. As we move forward with the strategy framework, then we can look at, how has it grown? How has it been unlocked? And then we also developed this roadmap, number of colleagues together summarizing the state of the wildlife economy report. And in this roadmap, there are 5 key steps to unlocking and growing the wildlife economy, which will obviously play a big part in terms of the implementation of the strategy framework. And Melanie mentioned, things like ensuring that policy and legislative framework is in place, because without that, very little can happen at a legal level. And at the moment, there's a lot of illegal, unregulated, and unreported wildlife economy activities. So how do we ensure that more people are benefiting? Because at this stage, it's often only a few that are benefiting. Next slide, please. Then we have a project at ALU as well, the SADC-TFCA project that some of you have already been involved in, where we are developing a framework similar to the SADC one, but specifically for the SADC-TFCA. And it is very much aligned with the SADC framework, as well as an implementation and related action plan. And that is why the 5 country case studies for the SADC-TFCA are very important to create this baseline for the framework specifically for CASA. And obviously the idea would be wonderful to create more of these frameworks for the specific TFCAs within the SADC framework so that we can really unlock and grow these wildlife economy spaces. Next slide, please. Then there's a wildlife economy resource database that is available on the School of Wildlife Conservation website. And we really welcome anyone to provide resources as well. This is essentially all the resources we've collected over the years of doing the wildlife economy research. And you can search by activity, you can search by country, you can search by author if you are looking for specific resources from people. And the idea is to have this again as a resource so we don't duplicate efforts, where people can go and find information and share learnings and experiences across the region. Next slide, please. Then the lessons learned case studies. We have one on carbon in Zambia and Madagascar, on ecotourism at this stage. Again, anyone who would like to provide a case study, we very much welcome ideas to work with partners on this, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. And they are, as Melly mentioned, wonderful value chains. They're wonderful projects going on that have excellent data. And so we want to document those so that we can share and learn between the countries within SADC and within the TFCAs. Next, please. And then we also have our debate series, which looks at different topics relevant to the region and relevant to the wildlife economy. Again, we would like to also see how we can fit this into the implementation of the framework, to share the learnings, to really discuss the topics that need to be discussed, and share learnings from countries that have advanced wildlife economies with those who are really just unlocking and developing their wildlife economies. Next slide, please. And then our Business of Conservation Conference is the theme this year is changing the African conservation narrative, everyone's business. And we would like to invite all of you to please come and join us in Kigali from the 14th to the 16th of October, where we'll really be, there's a huge focus this year on communities, on this changing the narrative. How do we really engage communities? So we have a lot of community representatives who will be attending. And then another key theme is sustainable financing. So very much related to the wildlife economy, but also numerous other financing options, because we need this suite of options to ensure resilience and sustainability within the wildlife economy space. Next slide, please. And then just really in closing, I want to present our Wildlife Economy Investment Index, which we have been discussing as a team with SAWAC and AWE as well, is the possibility of using this as a measurement of progress within the wildlife economy. So how are countries doing in the rankings? So for those not familiar with it, we developed this and launched it last year. It's based on 280 indicators that were developed in consultation with stakeholders. And next slide, please. It's made up of two sub-indices, the investment enabling environment and the wildlife status. So the wildlife status essentially is what is the asset base of the country? So what fauna and flora, then how is it being managed? And then in terms of investment enabling, how easy is it for investors to do business, public sector capacity, so governance, and then investment safety. How safe will my investment be? So the index is really to guide governments on how to improve this enabling environment, and then for investors as well to see, you know, where is a good place for them to invest. Next slide, please. So in terms of the results, this is the first iteration, and we try to use existing indicators, and we realize there's a need to include some new ones going forward to really capture the nuances of the wildlife economy. And so again, if you'd like to be involved in these discussions as we flesh out this index, please do get in touch. Next slide, please. So this is the overall index with the 280 indicators, including both sub-indices. And you'll see that SADC has fared very well. So the green are all in the top third within Africa. And other than Angola and DRC, who fall into the lower third, the rest of the countries, and we've got Zimbabwe and Mozambique in the middle third. So as a whole, SADC is really well placed in terms of that asset base and the investment enabling environment. Next slide, please. This one shows just the wildlife status sub-index. You can see again, great diversity, great asset base for this wildlife economy. So in terms of the strategy framework, we have the resources now. And then the next slide will show you how ready are we to allow investment in them. Again, most countries, we've got Namibia, Botswana, and South Africa in the upper third, and then the others needing some areas of improvement. And for that, the next slide, please, we have these national reports. So for every single country in Africa, there is a report, and obviously all the SADC countries are there. That includes the list of 280 indicators of where that country falls within Africa, within SADC, and then it shows which countries top. It has leading areas, lagging areas, and recommendations of how the country can improve their ranking for investment. And we also, next slide, please, we have a website that has every country's national report is available on here, as well as the methodology if you're interested in how we developed this. Next slide, please. The website also has a dashboard, so you can go and compare your countries. So say you are from Botswana and you want to see how you compare with Namibia, you can go and see how you compare on each of the indicators, on each of the sub-indices and the overall index. Next slide, please. You can also compare regional economic communities. So this is an example of comparing SADC and EAC. We can all say hooray, because you can see SADC is winning on all elements that are displayed in this particular dashboard example. But it's also a great way to show progress over time. So as we implement this strategy, is SADC going to, have a greater improvement in terms of the ranking? So SADC ranked first, and EAC was actually second in terms of the RECs in Africa. Next slide, please. And then just to end off, the African Wildlife Economy Community of Practice, many on this call are members of it, and many are part of the steering committee on it as well. We established this to really try and bring all of the people working in this space together, so we don't duplicate efforts. So we rather learn from each other, we share knowledge. And so if you'd like to join, Leanne will be putting the link in the chat. Please do join us. Within the actual full community of practice, there will be specific working groups that are looking at wildlife economy products and services and value chains, looking at the legal side, looking at the economics and this measurement. Where I started off with is we really, if we want to be able to monitor and measure the strategy framework, we have to have these baselines and key indicators that help us show how it has been unlocked, how it has grown, and also then to ensure the sustainability of the resources and the conservation of them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Sue. Without me wasting any time by trying to attempt any summary of the presentation, I think it's worth noting and just pointing out that now we know we do have a strategy framework in place. We know what we are aiming for. I think our very optimistic growth scenario that we've been presented is we are aiming at no less than 150 billion US dollars by 2030. And I think we've also been given a good overview of our position as the SADC region. We do have the resources. I think one of the maps was showing that we do have the resources, and we are ranked very well. And I think now the idea is to start thinking and talking about then what next. Let me allow for a few questions. I'll limit it to 5 minutes, just for some questions, clarification questions. I've got my colleagues who are watching out for any hands that will help me identify any hands and also identify any questions, comments in the chat box. So colleagues, any questions, comments? But let's stick to questions and comments for clarification. We will spare some time at the end to go a little deeper. Any questions, comments? I don't see any hand. Colleagues, can you see any hands?
I do have a hand, Rabson.
Sorry?
Hello, Rabson, can you hear me? It's Clara. I do have a question, if possible.
Please go ahead, Clara. Sorry, I can't see any hand from here. So
No, don't worry, that's fine. I know what you see. Thank you. So thank you for all the presentations and congratulations on the framework. It's really interesting to see how it developed and what the outcomes is. My question was more directed to Sue and this amazing work on quantifying what is the resource base and what do we know about what's being used and how a lot of things are still unreported on the use of wildlife, whether it is flora or fauna. So I was wondering if using information based on community-based natural resource management experiences in the various countries where they happen, notably Zimbabwe and Namibia, but even others, would help to fill a little bit of this gap. Meaning, is the information that comes out of people that are reporting on CBNRM, successful CBNRM activities, can then help to inform what are the activities that are also used for the wildlife economy or usable for the wildlife economy. Thank you.
Thanks, Car. Absolutely. So we do try and reach out to all levels. So for private sector, NGOs, government, communities, to try and gather as much data as possible. Obviously, countries are big. There's a lot happening, and so trying to gather all of that. And that's why we have quite stakeholder inception workshops as well to try and raise awareness of what we're doing. And that's why I made the request for the ones that are coming up, if anyone knows anyone, because the problem is that the data is not collected consistently at a national level. So there's an NGO working in a community or a community organization that's working, and they might be collecting their data, but it's stuck there. So yeah, the more we can get from those, And so what we are also trying to propose is that most governments do a household and livelihood survey every 5 or 10 years. So trying to add questions on there related to the wildlife economy, encourage stats departments to do that so that it becomes collected more at a national level. And, you know, what are they collecting and what is the average value of that per month, you know, if they had to buy it instead of collecting it from nature, or what are they receiving from those kind of activities. But a lot of this has to do with requiring, raising awareness and about the wildlife economy, because even the work we've been doing with governments, the wildlife economy is often just seen as tourism, you know. And, you know, Melanie was mentioning marula and baobab, and there's mapani worms and the, you know, plants in Namibia, but that people don't think of that as, you know, the wildlife economy. It's just, you know, we've always been doing that. So yeah, long answer to your question. Essentially, that information would be amazing to understand the value, because that is where the bulk of the value is, from livelihoods and survival point of view often. And then, you know, if we can get that into the more commercial value chains. I don't know, Melanie, if you would like to add as well.
Yeah, I think
maybe not
also,
now, Melanie. Maybe not now. Let's
Okay.
leave it for the session later. Sorry to do that to you, but I think I've worked with you well enough to take advantage of you. Any other quick question, or should we move on?
There was a question in the chat
Yes.
from I think, let me just go up here. Alcio Azevedo from Maputo National Park, one of my favorite places in the world. He's asking Sue, what is failing to SADC that, or I suppose what is causing SADC to have a lower position when the region has the biggest potential? I suppose this is on trade level. So maybe if you could answer that quickly, and then I would suggest we move on, because I'm getting concerned about time.
Thanks, Steve. No bias there with Maputo National Park at all.
No.
Essentially, a lot of it is the ease of doing business. So within the SADC region, there are often restrictions on trade, and it's great to segue into Frank's talk about trade. Is, you know, this, and often the policy and legislative frameworks have overlapping mandates. People, you know, it doesn't enable trade. And so that is often the problem. We have this potential, but there's not the ability to create the economy, is often the case. And then corruption is something that came out quite strongly in the index as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Sue. I think we should move on. Francis, are you ready? Please take us through.
Sure, happy to jump in. Okay, so I'm just got a few slides, ladies and gentlemen, on wildlife trade in SADC and beyond, that basically is going to show you that there is an emerging policy framework that this SADC wildlife-based economy strategy fits into very well. So next slide. So that we've just seen a couple of these, so they're great images, so we'll repeat them again here. And to reemphasize in the upper left-hand corner here that the framework aims to contribute to the conservation and sustainable use through the promotion of trade and investment in wildlife-based economy products and services. And yes, there's a lot of trade that's going on, and there's a lot of informal trade. There's a lot of traditional focus on tourism. In parts of the SADC region, there's a focus on hunting tourism, but there's also stacks of opportunity, as we've already had some references to in the previous two speakers. And I just put in the slide on the right, and repeating that slide, just to emphasize how important trade is to this whole vision. And they're highlighting trade in live animal species, trade in animal products, trade in medicinal plants, trade in marine animal species, and so on. As you can see, trade is really central to that, to the whole concept of the wildlife-based economy. But the question one might ask is the broader economy willing to accept trade, or is there a tolerance for trade in wild products in the context of trade in general? And I will say one of the challenges that we face in the African continent is the lack of intra-African trade. Africa is actually the least amount of intercontinental trade of any part in the world. North America, Asia, Europe, stacks of trade within the continent. In the case of Africa, very little. Much of the trade is still trade between an African country and a country outside of the continent. Think of the tourism sector, for example. Think of the hunting sector in countries like Namibia and Botswana. Okay, next slide, please. But SADC's got beyond our biodiversity wildlife trade interests. SADC has a regional indicative strategic development plan with a major emphasis on regional trade. And so one of the opportunities we have now is to take our wildlife economy and link into trade policy here outlined at the regional level with a strategic objective to deepen regional market integration and to use that to connect continental and global markets. With an outcome, it says here, increased intra-SADC and SADC extra-regional trade, which you might call continental trade in goods and services, and to link SADC to the tripartite free trade area, the African Continental Free Trade Area, and other multilateral trade agreements. So what we have is a mandate in SADC to promote trade within SADC and trade beyond SADC that we, with the wildlife products, goods, and services, can link onto. Now, I don't have a slide on the tripartite free trade area, but that's linking SADC to COMESA, of which some SADC members are members, and to the East African community. So you can think of the tripartite as basically Southern and Eastern Africa. But next slide, please, is on the African Continental Free Trade Area. So continent-wide, the big opportunity is the AFCFTA, which is now the largest free trade area in the world, and it includes the regional economic communities, including SADC, and the aim is to enable the free flow of goods and services across the continent. And so what I think we have here is a real opportunity to take goods and services from the wildlife sector in Southern Africa and make those available around the continent. Promoting ecotourism from East Africa to Southern Africa, getting Kenyans to come to Vic Falls is a good example. One that I like to talk about is introducing the Nigerians to biltong, to game meat biltong. Can you imagine if you start selling biltong in a place like Lagos, which is has very wealthy sections, what you could do? Right now, they can't even spell the word. They don't know about the product. So there's this whole opportunity for Southern African countries to start selling wildlife-based goods and services across the continent. Sorry, in the context of the AFCFTA. Further, and this is where you get into the technical part that this new initiative can really work on, the AFCFTA has a non-tariff barrier reporting platform, a reporting mechanism where if there is a barrier to trade, we can report that at the continental level and say this needs to be addressed. So if a Zimbabwean, say, is trying to export game meat to South Africa or to Botswana or to Kenya, and they hit a barrier at the border, they can register that formally through the AFCFTA and be able to get a review of it and a way to address reducing those barriers so that trade can go forward. Okay, next slide. So I thought those are the trade bits, but also we have an enabling and policy developing on the biodiversity conservation side. And here I'm just highlighting one of the targets of the GBF, which is critically important for us. And that is that the globe has agreed to ensure that the use, harvesting, and trade of wild species is sustainable, safe, and legal. Now, this is a really powerful target because we have our government saying that we should use, harvest, and trade wild species, but we should ensure that it's sustainable, safe, and legal, and on you go. So in other words, we now are starting to see international, continental, and regional alignment of trade and conservation, with trade playing a very important role. So the GBF, as you know, is part of the Convention on Biological Diversity, the CBD. They're trying to rebrand it as the Biodiversity Plan, so I put the logo up, but it doesn't seem to be catchy. Most people say GBF. And then I slipped into the bottom right-hand corner, something that has always been very worrying for many countries in Southern Africa is the role that CITES plays with respect to international trade of endangered species. Well, in the context of GBF Target 5, CITES focuses on trade and on sustainable and legal. For those technically, the sustainable is non-detriment finding, and the legal is your legal acquisition finding that a CITES listed species must have in order to have an export permit issued, whether it's on Appendix 1 or Appendix 2. But looking at CITES in the context of GBF Target 5 and in the context of the trade agreements at the regional, at the SADC level, and at the continental level, there's a real opportunity with the biodiversity strategy to rethink CITES as a strategic partner. CITES is a way to assure, enable, promote sustainable and legal trade of wild species. In other words, to get those export permits issued based on good analysis that trade actually is sustainable and legal. And that's trade within SADC and across the continent and beyond. Okay, so last slide, please. Okay, so I've just put them all together in one page here. The wildlife-based economy strategy framework links to the regional indicative strategic development plan, which links to AFCFTA, and then is supported further on the conservation side by both the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework, or the Biodiversity Plan for Life on Earth, the CBD, and as I've just said, a strategic use of CITES. Now, just a mention of resources available on our website. We have a short course training program up already on intra-African trade in wild meat, which introduces you to some of the concepts I've been giving. We've recently put out a report on scaling up Africa's elephant economy, which links to some of the discussions going on in Namibia and Zimbabwe right now about elephant culling. And we've recently been looking at some of the decisions going on in Europe to try and ban the import of trophies from Africa, which mostly affects the SADC region. And so there's some good resources there on that. But going forward, work on the wildlife-based economy strategy framework needs to be and should be linked to trade policies in general, so that the wildlife products get into the value chains around the continent and therefore provide really exciting goods and services to Africans, African products for African people. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Francis. I think without any further ado, let's move on to the next presentation. Thabang, over to you.
Your micro is muted.
Thabang, you're muted.
My apologies. Thank you very much, Rabson, and also the speakers that went before me. So following the development of such strategies and frameworks, it is very imperative, or rather it goes without saying, that we need to start thinking about how we're going to implement those. Because if we don't think about that, then these beautiful and rich frameworks, they get to be, shelved and don't see the light of day. But my role now is to take you through a sneak peek of what is actually in the horizon for the SADC wildlife-based economy strategy with regard to capacity building and initiatives that actually enable the implementation of the SADC wildlife-based economy strategic framework. Next slide, please, Roddy. So it is very imperative that the most important component or critical success factor towards implementation of such strategies is definitely capacity building, meaning training people and actually, providing awareness in terms of around the strategy, and for the strategy to be recognized not just locally and not just in the region, but also at international level. So the capacity building component of this strategy aligns with the strategic objectives of the SADC wildlife-based economy that Melanie has actually shown in her presentation. So the first one actually is the strategic objective number 3, that says actually the SADC and its member states are enabled to implement the wildlife-based economy strategy through international and regional national alliance. So the capacity building initiative as the baseline component of implementation of the strategy actually speaks to enabling member states to be able to implement the wildlife-based strategy. So the fourth strategic objective that aligns well with this component is that the SADC wildlife-based economy strategy has to be recognized by member states and the rest of the world. And this, what we are doing today, as Melanie has mentioned, and also the other initiatives that I'm going to present here, actually speaks mainly to those two strategies, and of course, with their related outcomes. Next slide, really. So the Southern African Wildlife College and the African Leadership University, the School of Wildlife Conservation, and the African Wildlife Economy Institute of Stellenbosch University has come together to form a consortium that actually looks at implementation or supporting the SADC office to actually implement the wildlife-based economy strategy at regional level and also, of course, within countries. And the aim of this program is actually to undertake a set of prioritized activities in support of the framework's 4 strategies and associated outcomes. This program is actually under development, and the tripartite, or rather the consortium, and the SADC Secretariat together with GIZ are looking into mechanism of seeking and securing resources to support the program. Next slide, really, please. And some of the prioritized initiatives or activities that will enable the implementation of the SADC wildlife-based economy strategy have been identified by the SADC and also the tripartite that I've mentioned before. So one of the first component will actually look at training and capacitating wildlife-based economy champions to enable the development of actionable ideas for the implementation of the wildlife-based economy strategic framework at local level, at national, and also at regional level. So one will ask, what are the champions? Who are the champions? So the champions are basically the national focal points that are going to be selected, and they will ensure that the strategy is implemented within the countries at national level. And this could be people from representatives from the government, representative from the NGOs, the private sector, the communities, and indigenous peoples and local communities, in institutions as well. So the second one is actually to establish and support a regional technical implementation group that will actually oversee the implementation of the SADC wildlife-based economy strategy. So this technical implementation group will actually will ensure that not only focus on this first phase of the implementation or of the support, but will also ensure that the strategy is implemented at regional levels by member states. And lastly, would be actually to conduct learning exchange programs on livelihoods and wildlife-based economy within the SADC-TFCA, starting with the learning exchange program that is going to take place in the GL-TFCA, bringing in different actors in the space of wildlife-based economy into the GL-TFCA to come and learn about the livelihoods initiatives and wildlife-based economy initiatives in that particular TFCA. And this could be leveraged by other activities that are happening in other TFCAs to go and learn on same issues. Next slide, really. And yeah, that will be it from me. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Tabang, for wrapping up our presentations. And I think Tabang's wrapping up comes in handy. And I think you probably have noted that there is a bias towards presentation from our academic and capacity building institutions, which was deliberate in a way, in the sense that, like Tabang said, what he was presenting is one of our maybe not immediate, not very immediate, but one of the immediate next steps, which is building capacity towards the implementation of the strategy framework, but also based on a lot of the background information that provides a lot of basic information that we can use as a baseline in the implementation of the strategy, as was presented by Sue, and also based on an understanding of what Africa is looking at in terms of intra-regional and intra-continental trade. Let me open it up now for a little more elaborate discussion, questions, comments, and views. Please.
Yes, Steve, yeah. There were some questions on the chat that were put in there. I think Sue has addressed some of them, but maybe I can just read some of them out. Would be useful. So FN Leia says, I want to know if you have explored the integration of technology to map and help track the wildlife economies activities in a standardized manner. And there was an earlier question, I think, from Olga about hotspots, identifying hotspot areas within the region where there's maybe a lot of activity. So maybe you can just speak to those first of all. I think any of the panelists can just feel free to come in.
Yes, any of the panelists, please feel free to come on. But Steve, if I may just propose that, I think let's prioritize questions from those that are raising their hands first, because the ones on the chat, people can read through those, and our panelists can also attempt to respond to them on the chat as well. Then we can come back to the questions on the chats after we have taken care of any hands that come up. But for now, any quick comments on the questions that Steve noted?
Repson, can maybe I give some input there?
Yes, please. Okay. Melanie, go ahead.
And maybe it covers both of them, is in the implementation plan of the strategy, some of the key initial steps are to, as a member state, to do an inventory of your assets and also an inventory of your value chains. And I think with that, that data, you can then start understanding your wildlife-based economy. And then the framework with the strategy, there is an M&E framework, would then allow for, looking at integration in value chains, and also then tracking them over time in a similar and systematic manner. So just from the strategy implementation point of view, that is the steps going forward. Sorry for the background noise.
Thank you, Melanie. I can see a hand from Lamek. Lamek, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Thank you so much, the presenters, for quite interesting presentations, quite insightful. My question is just thinking around on the wildlife economy and also the current trajectories that are unfolding in Southern Africa, specifically changing climatic conditions. And recently we are witnessing El Nino, which is leading to some droughts across protected areas. In some countries like Zimbabwe, Namibia, they are thinking about the culling of elephants. How do the end of the presenters find this, and how would they put the wildlife economy can be perceived in the near future under such conditions of changing climatic conditions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lamek. Maybe let's take another 1 or 2 questions before we answer that. I'm hoping that our presenters did take note of that question. Any other comments before we allow the presenters to respond? I don't see any hand from my end. Okay, let's just any of our presenters to respond to Lamek's question.
Hi, Robson. It's a difficult one, but an important one, I think. And so in our Wildlife Economy Investment Index, we try to account for climate change and the impacts of climate change, because that's going to have a huge impact on the wildlife economy, on that asset base and the different activities and human livelihoods in general. So I do think it needs to be included in any modeling going forward. I don't know if I'm answering the question specifically, but I do think that as we, in those growth models, and I think Melanie can correct me here, but I think you did look at that in your growth models, but you can add on here. But in those kind of modeling exercises and any future modeling that gets done on this strategy framework, we have to account for the impacts of climate change. I mean, I'm sitting here in Johannesburg and we've had about 1 drop of rain in the last 4 months, which is highly unusual. So as we all know in the region, it is a massive issue.
Thank you, Sue. Any other comments, questions? Lamek, are you happy? Are you answered?
I can step in just quickly and just say that the impact of climate change is on whatever land use we have, whether it's agriculture, livestock, or wildlife use. And so if we're going to be looking at climate change impacts, we also should be looking at where the opportunities are for wild use of a landscape vis-a-vis industrialized agriculture, domesticated livestock, where there may be advantages and disadvantages. So it's not just in a vacuum for wildlife alone, it's for however we use our landscapes and what the impacts might be. There is some work being done at the School of Climate Studies at Stellenbosch University that's actually suggesting that wildlife use is probably a better way to mitigate climate change than traditional agricultural uses. But of course, that's a big topic to be looked into.
Thank you very much, Francis. I don't know, I hope that the contact details of our presenters have been shared. If not, please take your time while we go through the questions now to also put your contact details on the chat box so that people can follow up with any of us after the session. Any other comments? Steve, if you don't mind, you can also look at some comments on the chats. I saw something briefly. Unfortunately, I can't read all the chats as they come up, but I saw something which was asked saying, I don't know how to ask this question. It would be good to hear that question.
So there's a question from Batwang Mokele from Lesotho. It's about the issue of endangered species and the wildlife-based economy. He mentions vultures, for example. So I think obviously it's a key issue in terms of how do you promote an economy where you've also got species that are threatened, and how do you manage and control those issues? Perhaps one of the presenters would like to comment on that.
Thank you, Steve. Anyone to comment on that?
Repson, I can perhaps take that one. I think it's important to remember that the value chains that we grow and establish in our wildlife-based economy are based on assets that are legally harvested. And to keep in mind that we're not going to be able to, not every asset or biodiversity asset is going to form part of a value chain. So we will have, biodiversity that we protect, And then there will be those assets that we can use as inputs to the value chain. So I think it's that balance. And that's vital. And that's where Sue's, monitoring what we're doing. So understanding our assets, what we've got, what value chains we've got, and then monitoring that we keep that balance of conservation and trade. And we want these assets to be available and the value chains to be available for current generations, but also future generations. So I think we really are going to be, and it's not an easy journey that we're embarking on, but I think it's a very exciting and very, very interesting area that we can contribute to the economy but also to livelihoods of individuals.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Can we move on to, I see a hand, Laura? There was a message that was put on the chat to say, please switch on your video while you're speaking and during the wrap-up.
Okay. I will do so then.
Thank
Hello,
you.
everyone. My name is Laura, and I work for Dan Church Aid. It's an NGO working in Zimbabwe. And one of the components of our work is to try and develop an economy around non-timber forest products in Zimbabwe, which is is in the initiation. And I would like to say that I'm very happy that there is a SADC framework, and that will be created a technical team that can build the capacity of the different countries, because in the case of Zimbabwe, for example, the legislation is very contradictory when you're looking to resource mapping, how do you do that, and then the trade, and then the transport. And so there is a need of looking at the legislation and amending the acts and making them to be more to speak to each other. But just so you know, in Zimbabwe, at least, there are a few organizations that we came together and we formed a working group working to try and find how to develop this economy-based aspect in Zimbabwe. And we will be very, very happy if other countries have more experience and can actually assess, give us some advices, or see what we're doing and give us some advices. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Tabang promised us some peer-to-peer learning exchanges there. Any comments from our presenters?
Yeah, Robson, if I could just... Thanks for that. I mean, we understand definitely that there's some activity. There are activities in other countries, and some countries are more advanced in the wildlife-based economy than other countries. And part of the baseline when we go through the capacity building process is to getting the champions together to actually try to understand what is the situation in different countries and what are the initiatives that are in place. And in looking at now implementing at regional level the SADC wildlife-based economy, then we're going to now look at some of the initiatives that are happening in countries and try to leverage from those and scale those countries. And these learning exchange programs and the capacity building initiatives aim to do just that, to get at what state other people and where are others, and we get a common understanding of the situation within the SADC region and learn from each other in that regard. And thank you for that, Laura. Thanks.
Repson,
thank you very much. Yes,
can I just add?
Melanie.
I think one of the most surprising things when we started this journey in South Africa with we call it here the wildlife-based economy strategy, one of the key things at the time was the thought that we needed to change our law and change our policies. In fact, when we actually did a review and sat down, we first tried to understand what the wildlife-based economy was in the country. We actually realized that the legal framework was there already, and we actually haven't had to change our legal framework. So I think it's a good starting point to define your wildlife-based economy in your country, and that is, it may be country specific. And then to really, go back to your legislatory and policy environment and look whether the policy is a barrier or whether it's actually an enabler. And obviously some countries will have to adapt the legislation, but we may be surprised that that some of the policies already enable the wildlife-based economy and the growth of that economy.
Thank you, Melanie. I think we're going to take maybe 2 last questions. I see a hand from F. Leia. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, colleagues. I understand, yes, South Africa is taking a lead, especially with the recently developed the white paper on biodiversity conservation and sustainable use. It is really taking shape along the direction of what we are talking about. But my question is on the entire strategy, since it is taking a bird's eye view on the entire SADC region. How will we work together to ensure there is a policy coherence at national level and at different sectors of government across the region, so that they all speak the same language towards the strategy? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any quick response to that?
I suppose that's for me again. I think the key thing here is that with what the strategy, the implementation plan for the strategy envisages is that with the current framework, countries will develop or review their policies and legislation and see whether there is alignment. But then, through the implementation of the strategy, the SADC-wide strategy, where we can learn and support each other as a region to adapt our policies and legislation. Just remembering that obviously member states' legislation and policy, is not it's not driven by the strategy, but rather would be in strategy, and if necessary, you as a country would then internalize this strategy into any policy or legislation.
Thank you very much. Steve, Nunesh, Rolly.
Yep.
Can I bring this to a close now?
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you so much to you and everyone else. Perhaps, if possible, if we could just ask, if you're willing, just to put your cameras on for 1 minute while we just take a screenshot of everybody. It really has been a wonderful, I've learned a lot. I was in that middle category. I definitely learned a lot over the last hour and a half. And I was so pleased to see people already making connections for follow-up. And yeah, stay tuned. We hope that this community of practice will grow. And Sue, yeah, we just need to speak about the network and the community of practice and how we work together, because you've got great resources out there. So we don't need to duplicate. Okay, so if I could ask you to smile. I see people from all the way from Maza there to Zimbabwe, across SADC, probably some people in other parts of the world. I'm going to take one more. I hope my colleagues are also taking some. Okay, thank you. Great. So I'm happy. Thank you. Our next one will be near the end of the year. It'll be on sustainable financing. You heard that's a key issue. So there's a bunch of work happening on that, and we will that'll round off our topics for the year. We will post this on YouTube, hopefully sometime next week. And if you want to have a look at any of the previous webinars, they are available there. Thank you for your participation and your interest. There is a saying that everybody doing a little bit of work somewhere basically changes the world. That's what we're trying to do. So thank you. Thank you, Rapson, for being volunteered at the last minute to step in and facilitate. Great job. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you very much on my part, and thank you, Steve, and thank you, colleagues. All right, I think we're closing it here then. Thank you.